Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. It's Books with Beth X here, and today we are discussing my June reading wrap up. So June was quite an interesting month because it was pure library books. I had clearly gone through my library and reserved a load of books, and it all came available in June. And I didn't read that many. I think June is probably my second worst month of the year. Well, you can't really beat, I think it was February where I read one book, but it was Fellowship of the Ring. And yeah, it was quite a slog that month. But to be fair, this month, even though I only read 3 books, my average rating was really, really good. It was 4.33 stars, which last month's average rating was 3.2 stars. Had an awful month in May, but June, even though I only read 3 books, 4.33 stars is a really good rating in my opinion, so yes, very happy with that. So as always, I will discuss all the books that I read this month, give a little review of them, and then at the end I will look at my stats. So if you love stats, hang around for that bit. If you're not much of a fan, then don't worry, I don't mind if you leave before the end. But as always, let me know what you read this month and what your average rating was as well, because I'd love to know. But yes, let's begin. So the first book I read this month was actually one that is now one of my favourite books I've ever read, and it also made it into my best books of this year so far, so if you haven't seen that, I'll link that up here. And it also made it into my mid-year freakout tag as well. Again, that was one of my previous videos, and I'll link it up here again for you. And that was Station 11 by Emily St John Mandel. Now, I was pleasantly surprised by this because I read Sea of Tranquility earlier in the year, and I think I gave that 4 stars. It wasn't my favourite. I enjoyed it. I thought the writing was beautiful and everything like connected really well, but other than that, I feel like it felt a little bit flat for me. Whereas this, 5 stars. Everything worked perfectly for this. Everything came together perfectly, and I just adored it as like the perfect book for me. So Station 11 is a sort of sci-fi story about a pandemic. Very similar to what we went through, but it had a very high death rate. I think it's like 99%. And you are following characters that are related to a celebrity who died the day before the pandemic started. And he was performing in a play, and you follow mainly a girl called Kirsten, who was a little girl in the play at the same time as this celebrity dying. And she's like travelling around in this sort of travelling symphony orchestra group performing Shakespeare plays. But you follow her. You also jump back in time to pre-pandemic, and you follow characters related to this celebrity. So he had like 4 wives. You follow a few of his wives. You follow his best mate, and someone who was a paparazzi who was obsessed with him. And then it jumps forward to the days of the pandemic when it first begins, but also forward 20 years to, for example, when Kirsten's older. And everything sort of comes together. There's a really good sort of cult plot line in there as well, and quite a lot of intense moments where characters are disappearing and no one really knows what's happening. But yeah, really good book. Everything come together perfectly. It was very gripping, but also very relaxing at the same time. It was almost a cozy sci-fi, but without being too cozy. The jumps back in time were not jarring as well. They sort of made sense at the time that they happened. You never sort of pulled out the story when they did happen, like what happens in a few stories that have a similar concept. And it shows sort of culture and art persisting in the wake of people just living for survival, living for every day, day to day, trying to catch food and survive. But people are still happy to sit there and watch this travelling orchestra as they're travelling around to little villages, and they still want sort of some sort of happiness in their life. But yeah, it was just really good. The ending was perfect. Everything came together perfectly. It was just, I can't emphasise how good this book was. And also considering, I believe it came out in 2018, and I read a review on Goodreads that said, oh yeah, I think this book is like really well written, and I feel like this is what a pandemic would actually be like. And when you're reading about the early stages of the pandemic that happened in the book, it was very evident to what happened to us, obviously with the lower death rate, but like, you know, like the stockpiling and people hiding away and things like that. So yeah, really, really good book. Everyone really needs to read it. I read it through the library, so you probably get access to it there, but obviously you can also buy the physical or buy it on Kindle or whatever. So yeah, really good. Highly recommend that one. And then the second book I read was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Now this is why I didn't get to read many books this month, because this took me about 2 weeks to read. I gave it 4 stars, and overall I did enjoy it. I quite like the historical fiction aspects of it, as well as, like, again, the jumping back and forth in time. But it was just quite a drag, quite a slog for me a little bit. It wasn't gripping enough for me to want to pick it up, but I still overall really enjoyed it. So this follows a girl called Addie who makes a deal with the devil to try and avoid being married, to try and give herself freedom in, I'm so bad at dates, I think it's 1700s. And she makes a deal with the devil to live forever, but at the expense of being forgotten every time she leaves a room. Until one day in the 2000s where she meets someone who hasn't forgotten her. It's just very beautifully written, in typical V.E. Schwab fashion. It's very well written. She's so good at coming up with these sort of concepts. And yeah, it's just really well done. I think the jumping back and forth overall did work really well. I quite enjoyed, like, the historical aspect of it, because she's born in France and you sort of learn a bit about rural France and then what Paris is like in the 1700s. She also leaves just before the war starts, World War One, I believe, starts. I think she also leaves for the French Revolution as well. And there's, like, hints of that, but she also goes, like, over to London and she goes to America. She spends a bit of time in Italy. It's just really interesting, that aspect, especially as a history student. I like that sort of thing. I like historical fiction. I think the bit where it kind of didn't work for me was towards the end. A lot of the back in time was just her spending time with the devil. I don't want to give away too much because that'd be a bit of a spoiler, but yeah, I feel like they didn't really, it kind of got a bit repetitive and a bit boring by that point. And I feel like it dragged out the story a bit too much, like they weren't always necessary. I mean, it kind of made sense at the ending, but again, I wasn't really the biggest fan of the ending as well. Maybe I'll mention a spoiler here, because basically, I'll only listen to this if you've read the book, okay? So I understand why she made the decision she did. It felt very out of character for her, and in my eyes, I thought she may have instead sacrificed herself to keep him alive. But instead, I guess she kind of did sacrifice herself to go with the devil in the end and be in a relationship with him rather than the male main character. But it didn't really make sense to me. If she loved him that much, she would have not sacrificed. She would have sacrificed herself so he could live. I don't know. I know he lived anyway, but I feel like she would not have gone with someone else. Does that make sense? Does anyone else agree? But yeah, overall, I thought it was a beautiful story. Addie is now one of my favourite characters, as you may have seen mentioned in my mid-year freakout tag. She's now up there as one of my favourite characters. And I did love the mix between historical fiction and sort of magical realism fantasy. And I liked sort of the concept of like the being forgotten concept. And I also did enjoy the love story and also the LGBTQ plus rep throughout the story. I loved her growth as well, from being sort of like a timid woman. I guess she was very much of her time in terms of like sex and things like that. So it's quite good to see her growing from there. But yeah, overall I did enjoy it. And actually, one second, I'll be back in a sec. So I will add, actually, if you did enjoy the trope of like being forgotten, definitely give this a read. This is The Sudden Appearance of Hope by Claire North. She also wrote The 7 Lives of Harry August. And this is a similar concept, but it's more of in a thriller aspect, and the main Hope is like a sort of a criminal more, and there's like a sort of a criminal enterprise mystery thing going on throughout the story. So if you like that trope, definitely give this a read. But yeah, it's not obviously as like lyrically written as The Invisible Life, and it's not, I think she does age in this from what I remember, and it's also not like a deal with the devil or anything like that. She sort of, as she's grown up, she then starts getting forgotten. So yeah, do recommend this though. This is really good. And then the final book I read this month, which I actually only just finished. I finished on the 30th of June, so I did well to like squeeze it in there. This was A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. It's my first Naomi Novik book actually, and I quite enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. It's very confusing. It's a very confusing book. I spent a lot of it confused. But basically the main setting is this dark magical school. So think Harry Potter, but very, very dark, as in the majority of the students do not make it out of the school alive, which I suppose the same thing happens in Harry Potter. But this is the first book in the series, and yeah, it's interesting so far. You're sort of thrown into the story, and you follow the main character, who is sort of, I don't know how to explain her. She likes standing up for herself. She doesn't want to make any friends because she feels like everyone is in the school for themselves. Basically, when you graduate, everyone goes down into this hall and you have to fight to survive. And the only people that usually survive are people that are called enclavers, who are people that sort of live together in an enclave. I don't probably pronounce that completely wrong. They sort of like then work together, they pull their magic together. The magic system's around mana, which you have to like do some sort of activity to build up. So throughout the book, she's like sitting there doing sit-ups or push-ups, or she's like crocheting and things like that, like quite physically draining stuff to be able to build up your magic. And the enclavers can like pull their magic together, and they also connect with the adults and things like that in their world. And they're the ones that tend to survive. They tend to like sort of make alliances with some of the people that are not enclavers, who can then join their enclave, or they have like certain skills where they can then help them get out alive, basically. But yeah, the main character pretty much spends the whole book just like scorning them and being a bit like, oh, don't want to work with them, they only want to be friends with me because I'm powerful, sort of thing. But she sort of grows throughout the story. She makes friends. She even makes friends with some enclavers. She's saved multiple times by a boy called Orion, who she sort of hates at first, and she still sort of, I wouldn't say bullies him, but everyone seems to like fall down on the ground around him, and she's the only one who sort of sees him as a human, because he's like a really good monster, magical monster hunter, basically. But yeah, overall I enjoyed it. I spent a lot of the book confused, especially as you're sort of thrown into the story. But I suppose in a way the main character is sort of thrown into it, even though she's been at the school for a few years. But it almost felt like there should have been a book before this book explaining everything. Maybe there is one, I'm not sure. But this is the first book in a 3-part trilogy. I thought it ended really well, and I am looking forward to reading the next one. It will just be a couple of months before I get to it, based on my TBR for the next few months. But yeah, I overall really enjoyed it. I'm intrigued about what will happen next, and yeah, I just want to learn a bit more about the world, to be honest. And there wasn't much world building because it was all based in the school, but it'll be good to learn a little bit more about how the world works and how the enclaves all work and things like that. So yeah, overall gave it 4 stars. So we're now onto the stats portion of the video, and as always I'll flash up the graphs on here. These are all taken from Storygraph, so you need to join that if you're not already a member. You can link it, you sort of like export your Goodreads books and put them into there, so you can sort of see your stats throughout the years, and I keep both of them updated now, so I've got the stats across both. So yes, as you already know, I read 3 books, which was a total of 1,152 pages. And I also listened to 4.47 hours of audiobooks, although I didn't finish one. I was actually listening to Caliban's War throughout the month, but I only listened to that when I work out. And because basically the main reason I didn't read much last month is because I was away like 8 days out of the 30, travelling for work and things, and like driving, and I didn't really have much of a chance to like sit there and read a book. So hopefully July will be a bit better. But yes, so yeah, I listened to 4.47 hours. All 3 of the books were adventurous. 2 of them were mysterious, which I think would be Addie and Darker Shade and Magic. 2 were dark Shade and Magic and Station 11, I suppose. 1 reflective and 1 emotional, which would be Addie. All of them were medium pace. 1 was 500 plus pages, which I'm guessing is Addie, and then 2 were 300 to 499 pages. All of them were fiction. 2 of them were in the fantasy genre, 1 dystopian, 1 sci-fi, 1 literary fiction, and 1 historical. All of them were digital, as you know, so I didn't finish any physical or audio books. I gave 2 4 stars and 1 5 star, which is how I got the 4.33 star rating. And then I'll put on the screen the pages and minutes read and listened to graph. So I did read most days. You can see a couple of drops in there based on when I was like travelling and things like that. But audio was a bit up and down because, as I say, I didn't work out that much that month. Hopefully I'll work out a bit more this month, and then hopefully that graph will be a bit more full. So yeah, that is my June wrap up. I hope you had a better month than me in terms of the number of books you read. How many did you read? Let me know. And what was your favourite book that you read last month? Because I'd love to know, because again, I'll add it to my ever-growing TBR if I've not read it myself. But yes, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.